everybody coming out, and of course to Dale and his team, Leander here with QuickBit, of being a Sask ambassador for the Canadian Blockchain Consortium. So I'll have them come up right away, but I just kind of wanted to give everybody a little overview of the CBC and what we do. I mean, our goal is to unite, to educate, and help regulate the blockchain community throughout Canada. So we've been doing that for about 5 years. We started off as the Alberta Blockchain Consortium. We switched over to the CBC. So don't think that we're the Canadian Broadcasting, so boo us when you see us online when we use CBC, because we're not. So our goal is to actually work with all different types of the provincial governments, federal governments. We've been in meetings. We've gone to Ottawa. We're going to Ottawa again. And realistically, we want to be the voice of the people, the voice of the companies that we represent, whether it's miners, currency companies, exchanges, people that are selling ASIC equipment. We represent all of them. We're an inclusive group that allows everybody in. We have 70 plus members from the big guys like the Oslers and the Deloittes and the of the world, that when we do sit down with the governments, it's not myself and Kolea and anybody else. We're bringing in the big players and having them saying, this is what we're doing for clients that are already looking for regulation. This is what we should be doing. So when the premiers or Michelle Rempels of the world are asking questions, it's the digital assets leaders of these companies that are answering them for them. So we think that we're going in the right direction. We're doing a lot of great things throughout. We have 7 different committees. If anybody wants to join, we're open. And come on. We have some brochures there. You can head to our website, check it out. Inclusion, of course, the legal committee. You got to be a lawyer. We have fintech. We got access to banking. So we got lots of different committees that if you want to get involved in the blockchain community, it's a great way to do it. We also host a summit every year. The last one was in Calgary here in October. We had 350 people. We're hosting the next one in Toronto. We're also hosting a yacht party in Miami at Bitcoin 23. So if you know anybody going down there, we're going to be doing that. We also have a monthly magazine that's free. Sign up. We're always looking for people to contribute to it. So if you think that you're a writer, I'm not. I don't contribute to it. Please just reach out and we'll be there. So so as Dale, Leander, I want one of you to come up and talk a little bit about QuickBit, because we're very, very happy with the ambassadors that we have. So we want somebody at the ground level here to be, let us know what's going on in each province. The only province we don't have anybody in is Manitoba. So if you know of anybody, please tell them to get a hold of us or make an introduction, because we would love to have somebody in every single province. So without further ado, Dale.
How's everybody here? QuickBit. I got into the space in 2014 and launched the first Bitcoin ATM in Regina, and the company has grown organically. We're still a small company, but we've grown organically, where we have 11 BTMs in Regina and southern Saskatchewan, and then I opened up a retail store in Regina, where we provide education, sell hardware wallets, books, magazines, T-shirts. But basically, the reason why I did that was because in 2014 nobody knew what Bitcoin was, and in 2020 everybody has now heard of Bitcoin, but they still really don't know how it works. Right, in 2017 we had the big ICO craze, Ethereum. We had all of the altcoins. There was a lot of misunderstandings about blockchain and how it works, and now we're getting into Web3 and now ordinals. But so we joined the Blockchain Consortium because we, as a company, basically have the same, the same idea, where we need to educate. We need to tell people how everything works and how everything works properly. So they've welcomed us. The organization has, welcomed us, and us. I'm very excited to be able to spread the word in, all of Saskatoon, Regina, all over, the province. So we've been having fun so far, and we want to have more. And yeah, like I say, it's just growing the community, spreading the word. And there's a ton of misinformation, and we'd like to be able to provide the correct information. So thank you very much.
Yes. Thank you, Dale. And we'll bring up our guests here right away. I guess I didn't introduce myself. I'm Jade Alberts, the Vice President of the Canadian Blockchain Consortium. One of the things we're most proud of is that we're all volunteers. So none of us get paid. We've all been doing this because we love it. We're all doing it because we're passionate about it. And, my real job is I'm an entrepreneur who's been lucky enough to exit my own business and been part of 3 others. I do a lot of angel investing and very active in the early stage startup community and investment community. So if anybody wants to talk about that, I'm probably more knowledgeable about that than I am Bitcoin mining. But that's where our next 2 guests are. So we'll bring them up and have them do a little introduction. Gerame and Will, come on up and do a little introduction for yourself, and we'll get underway. Yeah, go ahead, Gerame.
Hello. Hey, I'm. Hello. It's cool hearing yourself the first time. I'm Gerame, and I started a WAIMEA availability services. We do Bitcoin mining basically as a service, management, building and designing the data centers and the infrastructure, helping clients kind of get start to finish, following the electrical code, making safe data centers and following safe principles when kind of building their data centers. And now we're trying to pivot into renewable energies. So that's what we're doing, and trying to bring the renewable to Bitcoin mining where we can.
Hey, I'm Will Ingenthron. I'm kind of all over the map with, I guess, the blockchain stuff. One of the main focuses that one of the entities that we're developing right now is the services in and around in the blockchain and the Bitcoin mining space. We're one of 3 MicroBT certified, factory certified Watts miner repair entities in Canada, doing work for Hut 8. Our guys are over at Hut 8 all the time, taking care of their machines and moving things forward. Anything from overclocking, just general O&M. We're looking to develop our own sites as well, and just looking for maximizing the value in the mining space. Generally, though, my background is power generation development, about 3 gigawatts-ish of different facets of that, a lot of regulatory framework focus. And similar to Gerame, we've kind of bumped alongside each other for many years now, which is great and exciting. And but a similar vein, I think the future of this stuff is kind of merging, not only merging the technology with the energy and the securing of the financial side of things, but then just the value that those all kind of coming together, but also moving it forward kind of in the renewable space, but getting that extra value out of these types of operations, these energy intensive pieces that can really help out grids, power grids, stabilize them, welcome renewables onto the grid in a lot more healthier way. And it's a lot of the work I do is just connecting with the political folks as well, and some of like the SAS powers and a lot of operation stuff. I know you focus in Alberta a lot too, and there's a lot more opportunity there in many ways, but I'm rambling, so I'll stop.
Oh, never a ramble. And thanks for mentioning Hut 8, a good partner of the Blockchain Consortium as well. So I know a lot of the background that I have in mining is hanging around smart people like these 2, and we were lucky enough to take a UCP government delegation from Alberta, Washington, and Ottawa down to learn what they're doing in Texas. So we learned right from ERCOT how they're working, how they're doing it. We're going to be signing an MOU with their governments between the Alberta and the state of Texas. So we're pretty proud of that. So I'm really kind of dived into the Alberta because, well, they're open. They're one of probably the first governments that have said, we're here. Come in. We want you. We need you. We'll take you in. So that being said, how do you think, what's the current state here of Bitcoin mining in Saskatchewan, and what's holding it back, and what are some of the opportunities? Will, why don't you start?
The price of power, number one. I think that's like something that drives a lot of the mining operations wherever you are in the world, is looking and trying to identify the low cost of power and stability as well in that price. I know some of our initial development sites that haven't moved forward. We're focused in Manitoba because of the hydro. It's clean, which is just generally exciting, but also the hydro brings like long-term stability of the power price. You know, everything's kind of going up over time, but with the zero cost of fuel and legacy power plants that are amortized way far out in the distance, that you know that your power price is relatively stable. So that's kind of what was the question again? We'll just
I guess what are some of the opportunities here for and challenges?
Saskatchewan specifically, one of the things that I think is kind of, I touched on it there in that initial kind of ramble, is that focusing on that demand side component. So just kind of like for like large loads on the grid that are sitting there paying SAS Power to consume the power, miners have the ability to ramp down quite rapidly. So if you're sitting there and let's say some generation or supply generation intermittent, whether it's a cloud covering a solar facility or wind dropping off, or maybe more load coming online that's intermittent, like an Everaz power plant or a steel mill, very quickly you could call on some of these mining operations to ramp down, which offers a service to the grid. And the nice things about Bitcoin miners, although it's like an asset and you want it to be operating all the time to maximize your return on your asset, to be able to ramp down during shorter periods of time, a few hours at a time, a couple times a year, when these certain events evolve or come to fruition, to save grid stability, it has a value, and that this is something that SAS Power now is like putting out there a bit. It's not so obvious that it's happening, but as they kind of learn to engage in these programs, and the system operators are able to kind of trust, and the safety systems are in place to make sure that, like through SCADA or whatever it is, that these types of systems can be ramped down and be located in certain areas too. Bitcoin mining is basically can be located anywhere, or any large substation, that you can then offer some of these ancillary services that definitely help out as well. And then I think another big opportunity, and the renewable, I call it renewable, but using the waste heat or the waste energy from the mining operations. Like right now, it's basically the majority is air cooled. Some of the S17s are immersion, and it's more about just like get rid of the heat off the chips. So that they can operate, and you can push more out of them. The more you can dissipate that heat, the further you can push them. But now the new miners, or some of the new miners, are hydro-cooled, so you can push them a lot harder, a lot more intensely, because you're able to pull the heat energy out of the equipment and not damage it. But now you're sitting there with fluid that has this heat in it that you want to dissipate or use for other types of operations, whether it's heating facilities, preheating water going into, let's say, a hospital that always has a draw of hot water, or some of these new central heating plants. Like there's one in downtown Calgary. You go to some rural locations and some kind of unique spots, and they have these central heating plants. What an ideal opportunity. And now maybe they're not using it full load throughout the entire year, but you're able to add that extra value and maybe compete in an area where the power price is a little bit higher, and find those unique kind of opportunities. Again, long-winded, sorry.
For sure. Yeah, definitely the biggest problem is the price of power. When you blend it all together, I mean, the real issue is the coal generation that we have in the province, and their cost of goods sold on that electricity. It's just not viable for them to be able to, get 3, 4, 5 cents like you do in Manitoba. So that's the biggest problem. It's why people haven't come here. It's why I don't operate here. It's why a lot of people don't operate here. But the opportunities, I think, are actually outweighed in Saskatchewan than probably a lot of other locations, mainly due to the district heating reapplication that you can use in small communities, remote communities, rural communities. Additionally, I also think there's a lot of potential for the waste reuse on not just the heat side of the miners, but going into communities such as feedlots, wastewater treatment facilities, landfill gas collection systems. All of those really harm our environment on a day-to-day basis. The methane that's released is really potent. I think targeting those emissions in small rural communities like we have in Saskatchewan can create power sources, create jobs, and create an industry that doesn't exist right now that can grow those rural communities that we see dying off slowly one by one. And that's good. It gets me out of bed.
Well, that's interesting because we've just, Ben, who was supposed to be here, just finished our white paper on Bitcoin mining, and it's a 41-page. It will be released here. We've presented it to the Alberta government. We're taking it to Ottawa next week, presenting it to them, and then we're going to be hopefully getting in front of a whole bunch more premiers, especially the ones that have put a moratorium on Bitcoin mining. But what about some of the off-grid stuff? Because that's something that we've talked about here. When you said about the switch, like literally in Texas, there is a switch that says when it gets cold, you can't mine Bitcoin. When it gets too hot, you can't mine Bitcoin. It's not even an option. So is there and we're doing a lot of that in Alberta, and we're seeing some of it throughout other provinces. Is that an option here?
It definitely is. There's thresholds for SaskPower. They do it right now. It's called demand response. SaskPower offers any client who's currently consuming 4 to 5 MVA of demand can participate in demand response. But the problem with that is for Bitcoin miners is their price of power is already too high. So they're not going to invest in the infrastructure to be able to have that power and that utilization. But demand response and curtailing is available through SaskPower. And just for clarity too, Alberta and ERCOT, their RTO, pool grid utilities, which there's a big distinguishment. SaskPower controls the grid vertically integrated from start to finish, generation, the distribution, transmission lines, whereas in Alberta it's deregulated, with air quotes I'd like to put in there. Basically there's a lot more opportunity to be able to participate in demand response initiatives in ERCOT, whereas here they kind of just say 5 megs, other than that it's not big enough for us, but it is possible to do here. And I think working to lower those thresholds definitely would make it more opportune environment.
Yeah, I echo that. It's when mentioning demand response in Saskatchewan, it's like a 1-page document you look at. They're currently looking for 85 megawatts, minimum of 5 megawatts, and it's like you say, it's still the number one kind of thing that you need is that proper price of power. And if you're not able to hit that, the infrastructure won't be coming in the region. And not that it's a little tricky because you want to see it kind of evolve and things kind of happen outside the box, but it's quite tricky in this region because it is kind of that overarching one ominous entity that doesn't really have the mechanisms built in it or in its design or regulatory framework to build those efficiencies within its own rule book, versus the open fiat market that is Alberta, wherein if something's written in the regulatory framework that doesn't follow an open fiat like a grid, then you can argue, go in, work with the system operator, change it in the next ISO terms and conditions so that it follows better the overarching fair, open, efficient, and competitive market. I think that's what the acronym stands for. I don't know, someone back me up. But so it's constantly improving. There's the mechanisms built into place, and there's a system operator that's sitting there trying to do that. And things are discussed and debated. Versus Saskatchewan, you're talking. I mean, no disrespect, because there's great people in SaskPower and in every organization that you work in, and it's easy to cast shade from the outside looking in. But it's extra work. This is work that hasn't been on their plates before, and so it's like, well, who's going to take it on? Well, I'm only paid so much. I'm done at 5 p.m. or whatever it is, and you can't really blame folks for that either. But it's I think that's some of the biggest mountains to climb, is to kind of that interface between the government that leads an entity like SaskPower and pulls it forward, and then having those people be educated and of the understanding, and then pushing the SaskPower forward. And right now we're really lucky in Saskatchewan in that or I think it's lucky, or there's an opportunity that could be arising. We have a new CEO at Sask Power. He's kind of politically appointed, which is fine. He seems like a finance-driven individual that gets it, which to me means like if you can identify financially economic directions that the entity can move, and I think that some of this, like the stuff that we're working on, offers that value addition to an old legacy type of system that will help drive it forward and foster the avenues. It won't be easy, it'll be chunky, but things are better now than they have been in the past. Trying to be optimistic.
Always have to be optimistic. Well, I know one of the things that we, in the white paper that'll come out is talking about abandoned wells and obviously flaring and things along those lines. Again, the renewables, and one of the things that, because mining and crypto, it's politically agnostic, even though it's a political nightmare, as we say it. But one of the things that we're talking about is the jobs that it can bring. You're talking about these are literally data centers, like Microsoft and Google and all of them operate these huge freaking data centers. Well, this is no different. They actually use more energy because they're pulling it off the grid, and they can't even shut them down if there is any problems. So I know we positioned it, in the white paper to talk about, cleaning up these wells, making sure that they're decommissioned properly, using this excess energy, selling it back onto the grid, creating more jobs, creating higher paying jobs, and actually even putting some vertical farming in on using some of these. Is there options like that here in Saskatchewan? Because we're both energy provinces. We're both really oil and gas. So is there options like that here through the renewable side?
There's definitely there is, and that's what I'm really excited about, mainly in Saskatchewan. What I'm focusing on for 2023 is working with the government to be able to acknowledge those wells, and I guess there's really multiple tiers to look at. Just in oil and gas production, methane's emitted as a byproduct from the solution gas, and that's one faucet to target that can clean up both industries. It can provide reliable renewable energy for the Bitcoin miners. It can also clean up the methane emissions from the upstream oil and gas productions. You go down that ladder and you have abandoned and inactive wells, there's no production occurring on those wells. There's nothing. It's just a piece of equipment sitting in some land, and it's actively emitting methane into the atmosphere, 30 times worse than carbon dioxide over 100-year period. So we want to look at that, and we want to tap into those. And right now, there's not a lot of, I guess, A to Z paths. How do we get there? How do we get the government to let us use these wells? So that's really the opportunity here, is to go after those opportunities because they're tremendous. Alberta's utilizing them to the fullest potential. You're seeing it through the states. And then additionally, outside of the oil and gas, you have those same methane emissions across the board. So I think really just looking where we can put the miners, and that's the thing, is they're location agnostic, they're load agnostic, they're time of day agnostic. They don't care. They'll run whenever you want. So we really just need to put them where we can lower our emissions and create a more sustainable, I guess, environment by utilizing Bitcoin.
Yeah, and just to add a little bit more to that, like they're very malleable in the sizing. Like you can take the load and move it, increase it at increments of 3 kilowatts or whatever, which is really nice to kind of fine tune different types of this backstopping or load or selection areas. But yeah, I don't know.
Well, let's add to that. I think, say if we get a perfect scenario here and we're able to utilize, the oil and gas and the methane and what we're doing, how many jobs do you think this could create for the province? Easy answer.
And it's funny. We were doing modeling on this in the last month because we were trying to figure out roughly 1 megawatt of mining creates about 1 full-time job, 3 part-time jobs or temporary jobs through the construction phase, and then 1 full-time job for the actual management of the operation. And there's gigawatts of methane emissions occurring. There's over 300,000 abandoned wells. There's over 500,000 producing wells. That's just on the oil and gas side of the equation. There's every municipality in Saskatchewan, Alberta has to have a landfill. There's tremendous methane emissions that are just otherwise being wasted. So when you try to say, okay, extrapolate this, let's go after 100% of it, it's thousands and thousands of jobs that have the potential to be created through deploying these distributed production points, I guess, Bitcoin production and consumption points.
Yeah, and I would just like add to that too. I think there's a lot more jobs in and around the methane side of things and operating the power equipment. On the mining side of it, the data centers, for the amount of power consumption, it's like if you're grid connected, there's still jobs there, don't get me wrong, and there's still value add for land, taxes, everything else that comes along with that. It's a little bit less though. There's jobs around maintenance of the machines, but the opportunity on the job side for like data centers, and I don't know, I always hear this like job creation thing and I get a little bit nervous about that because it is kind of like a politically like pushing thing, and you always hear these numbers of politicians will like, and not just I'm not saying Bitcoin specifically, but like whether it's these different types of projects, whether it's a gas plant at Moose Jaw or something like that, and then you're like, okay, well it's whatever, 22 jobs, it's a lot, that's 22 potential families off of that, but I feel like there's a lot of decisions made that are grandiose or like kind of pushed on the job front that maybe are taking it further than it is. But I think with the more that you can bring those types of jobs, because those jobs are going to be going somewhere in the world with the Bitcoin mining, they're always going to find the path of least resistance for the locations, and the more that you can foster these types of new technologies and be at the forefront of it and train people up in and around in your regions, the better it is for your region to keep that closer to home, essentially. And if over time you don't start creating those jobs and those people that are putting in the time and effort to learn this stuff and to how it works or how to connect stuff and putting in their own or that time and effort, then it doesn't build upon itself. It's like a slowly what do you call it, compounding event that as you create more knowledge base close to you, it becomes again cheaper, more economical to build, construct. The supply chains are there. It greases the wheel that then it just compounds on itself. And maybe something like to take it a little bit on the side, like power generation, solar. Let's say if you're going to market to build a 100 megawatt solar facility in a region that has barely built anything because they've maybe been against it or trying to not virtue signal or whatever the heck's going on there, even though it makes perfect economic sense and operational value to the grid and all the rest of it, now you're all of a sudden turning around and your power plants cost way more in this region than they could if you were just slowly, gently, like letting the labor force grow organically in a stable market where there's not instant fluctuations in one direction or another, meaning you allow it one day and then you don't allow it one day, and that's the worst thing you can do to any industry. But yeah, for the jobs front, I think it's important to have stability, because then you have in the framework in the industry from a political side of things, so that you can have the steady growth and the healthy competition, and it keeps prices more chewed up. The more stability you can have in an industry across the board for anything, including Bitcoin mining.
Well, we're in an election year, so for the next 3 months, all we're hearing about is jobs. So it's really nice to put, and we've got this white paper onto the NDP desk too. So
and that's again, it's important.
Absolutely,
it's very important.
Yeah, and I mean that's what they want to see. That's what they're going to tell people. That's what they're campaigning on. So when you say, let's talk a little bit more about that here in Sask. So you said there's a new president at Sask Power. He might be a little more friendly. You know, what type of regulation, or are they going to work with this? The regulators here, or are they going to copy other ones around there? What's going to have to be done here to move the needle? Is it jobs? Is it what do you guys think it is?
For me, from my perspective, and I think it's maybe drawing on my past experience, but the number one thing that I think is very important for this region is to understand the real value of different types of power generation. And that also will include and come across onto the load side of things. It'll be not necessarily saying time of use, but kind of into the time of use thing. We have an abundance of renewables. Renewables basically just dump onto the grid when the wind's blowing or the sun is shining. In Alberta, they bid in it. It's called bidding in at zero. They don't have a bid price, essentially. But that then depresses the power price across the grid, and it reduces the costs of the power for everyone involved. So for an entity like Sask Power, that doesn't, my understanding, and won't get too into it. They don't have an understanding of what the real value, operational value of different types of generation, which I think is extremely important as you start to choose to allow more solar onto the grid or wind onto the grid, and it does have influences in the back end, but that will also help drive the value of the power being consumed, and being able to drop that cost, because now you're trued up what the real cost is, and in doing that, or focusing on what the real value is, and putting the formulas together, whatever it is, that becomes politically agnostic. It's not like, okay, vote me in and I'm going to bring more renewables on the grid. No, we're just operating the grid economically, and this is how we do it, and these are the real value of different types of generation or different types of load, that then it doesn't matter who is voted in. It becomes timeless in a way, and it creates that stability, kind of what I was alluding to before, touching on before, that is super healthy for our industry, because you know how what your risk is. You can frame it, and then you can start doing your capex, because you know what your returns are going to be, and you can run those economic models. And I think it's just important to have those kind of politically agnostic kind of mechanisms in place to be able to foster things forward.
Yeah, I definitely agree. I think one big piece that you're seeing in ERCOT and some of the U.S. Grid pools there is a non-discriminatory rate plan. A rate structure is really, I think, a key thing to come in. So they assume all industrial consumers are the same loads. They assume they're all the same customer. They're all doing the same thing. They just use different amounts of power. I think creating a rate plan strategic to Bitcoin miners, so then the SaskPower says you can use the power, but you have to come where we want you. Now they can strategically deploy the load in places where they know they need load in the future. So it can basically validate, okay, let's pay for this 500 megawatt power plant now because we know we'll have the load on day one through, these pre-auctioned rate plans that are, ideal for Bitcoin miners. They shut off, curtail. It's all baked into the rate plan, right? If we do that right from the get-go, we could pair minimizing that infrastructure cost, deferring the rate, and that's the biggest thing too with a vertical integrated utility. The rate payers, which is basically us, are the ones paying for the grid and paying for the generating plants, right? So at the end of the day, if we can blend it so the rate payers understand that Bitcoin miners are actually helping them improve their grid and not actually taking away from their grid, that will help propel regulation and policy in this province to be able to do those things, to be able to implement that.
So that's top down. What about bottom up? What do miners have to do, or anybody that wants to get in there to kind of catch the ear, or how can we help, as an organization like CBC, to move the needle here in Saskatchewan?
Getting in front of the politicians, getting in front of people that make the decisions, and the lawmakers and the policymakers, getting in front of them with people like us and the blockchain consortium who actually understand the technology, can properly convey it in a conversation and explain to these people how it works, and not so much about the negative sides of what's happened over the 12 months, but focus on actually the 20-year horizons. What can this do for our communities? What can this do for our grids? What can this do for our citizens, right? Getting that conversation in front of them is huge, because right now, we're talking with the Minister of Energy and Resources here in Saskatchewan, and they basically had no idea what Bitcoin mining did, how it worked, how they would use it. And once I started talking, okay, well, we could use this on inactive wells, he's like, that's definitely an interesting idea, right? So I think getting in front of them and having those conversations with people, unfortunately, up until I guess more recently, I always viewed that as an impossible kind of bridge to cross. But if we could start to cross that bridge, and I think we're doing it with efforts that the CBC and other people are doing, we'll start to have that conversation.
Yeah, I agree with that. Communicating clearly and concisely with the folks, instead of telling, just showing. It's this is the economics. This is how it works. You have a grid that is built to operate for peak load time so many years in advance, so it sits idle. Overall, there's this huge gap of opportunity of unutilized equipment that you can increase your sales, your revenues. In Saskatchewan, SaskPower has a back door where they literally take money out of it and just add it to the general revenue fund for the province, which is, it's a thing. It happens. It's real. It's like a hidden tax. But if you can take this very valuable infrastructure and increase that value add through it by adding just over, like not overutilizing, but more, pulling more, getting a higher utilization rate out of the existing infrastructure, that's the way to do it. And just to like further some of you were talking about placing miners wherever's right for the infrastructure itself. That's something that's so advantageous for mining, is that it's so you can focus. It's mobile. It can go anywhere, relatively speaking, and you can size it across the board. And also with the mining, miners are okay with maybe, and this is something that's not really talked about, I think, and I don't know if it's opening a Pandora's box, but you could have potentially contracts that have a time limit, and then you slowly ramp down as, let's say, an area, like you build these huge transmission lines out to a region that you know there's going to be oil and gas development in, and they're sitting there in an extra 80 megawatts of capacity. Let's throw some miners there that, sure, okay, you have to drop by 5 megawatts every 3 years or whatever it is, that you're going to lose that, and that's part of the contract, and just be upfront about that. And maybe it's a little bit faster that it happens that you have to lose it or drop it. But then that's maybe those opportunities where you can get that lower price power because, okay, well, we're not using these anyways, these lines. And in order to attract this type of extra revenue, that's now like, it's worth it for us to offer these special contracts out to these short or these limited time contracts to these certain regions. And that's the stuff that I get interested in, and that I think is important to communicate to the SAS powers, the politicians, whoever it is, but show them the value add, the numbers, focus on the economic, and that's, I think, it's our responsibility to clearly communicate what that is, and the potential that's there, and then execute upon it and push them and hold them accountable for it. But we're partly responsible for bringing that forward. It's easy for us to say, oh, you don't see it. It's so easy. We can make money doing this. Everyone can be doing it. But you need to have the right people, the people with moxie inside the organizations that are well respected people. They want to go above and beyond the call of duty. They don't just want to show up and grab their coffee breaks and then go home at 4:30 or whatever it is, collect their paychecks, and they're just interested in doing greater good for the community or the region as a whole. I think it's a great opportunity to do value add. The mining's happening anywhere. It's going to happen somewhere in the world. We might as well bring it and maximize the value of our grid and the sunk capital expenditures that are going into building the transmission facilities, distribution, substations, and again, I think that when you talk about that contract, that time limit to the contract, I think that's the thing that will start to catch some interest. It's like, okay, I don't want to commit 3 cents a kilowatt hour, whatever the heck it is, for this region, because that just that doesn't look good. We're picking favorites and whatever. But if it's a temporary thing that where you hedge stuff off, I think that's a nugget hidden in there.
And that's one thing that I've heard a lot of miners talk about, and we've mentioned, is that everyone thought that when you're going to make weed legal, that everybody was going to be smoking pot on the corner, right, and things like that. But it's brought in such a revenue for every province, and we're talking about maybe 2 new tax streams for a government, which it's hard to do. You know, what do you want to do? Go tell everybody that now you're gonna, what's your PST here? We don't have one, so 6. So okay, now we got to go up to 7. But you know what? Maybe we can find another way to generate some more revenue for the province, and so that maybe goes away or goes down, right? So I mean, it's something that the numbers don't lie, and this is 100% agree with what you guys said. We have to talk about the numbers because that's what's going to move the needle with the politicians.
I was just going to say, it's happening right now in Quebec with, I think, if you're with Hive and the other one that's down there. The Bitfarms. Their local community, Sherbrooke, I think, didn't have to increase property taxes when other surrounding communities were, because the Bitcoin miners were there, because the Bitcoin mining tax revenue subsidized that community's need. They didn't need to increase while everyone else did, right? So that's a real world use case that I think validates that traction, right?
Yeah, and just like it's something that can come in and go. It's like not dirty. It's not obtrusive. It's quickly deployable, and those extra dollars are important for those rural communities. Like this transmission infrastructure, it's everywhere, and it's one of those things you take for granted. It's it's an expensive thing. It's essentially, in my opinion, and I'm super biased, but I think it's one of the most kind of recognized high value infrastructure pieces that has been around for over 100 years. It's been growing. It's taken a long time, but it's old. It's always being replaced. There's a ton of money going into it, and it's underutilized. It's if all of a sudden you're sitting there and you could be like saying all your roads out there that are built, like the New Regina bypass. I don't know if anyone knows that, but you like look at it. There's no cars on it, and it's built for so much far into the future. But if you could, and it was, let's just say there's a toll road, but if all of a sudden you could just like add more cars. I don't know. It just seems like a no-brainer.
Before we get to our last question here, I would like to see, does anybody have any questions?
Good question. So the halvening's coming up. Like, how does that factor in your forecasting? Like, how sensitive are the mining operations to the price? Like, what would happen? Like, let's say, knock on wood, Bitcoin goes under 10K. Like, what happens then?
It would be pretty devastating, I'll say. So it's why I'm focusing more on also being a vertically integrated Bitcoin miner. I think creating the production and the generation side, well, we can supplement the grid, and that's amazing. If Bitcoin miners really want to keep developing and keep creating, I guess, growth and sustainability, they need to generate their own power. That's how you get the numbers down. That's how you really, your margins are very transparent too, and you don't have to worry about being, them increasing because you control them effectively to some degree. That combining with the wave of immersion cooling, and that's something that our company has looked at pretty in-depthly. Post-halvening, you probably won't have air mines. Air mines will be phased out. They'll go away the way of the dinosaur, and immersion will kick in to stopgap the fact that they can't lower their costs. And then the next halvening period, you'll see it all be based in energy. You'll see it all be based on renewables, and you won't be grid connected. You'll be through these systems will be. That's my vision, and that's how I see it kind of playing out. Because ultimately, it's a goal for the lowest price of power. It's really just an arbitrage battle. So to get those price of power lower, you either have to generate yourself or strategically partner with the utilities to get those lower. Otherwise, you're going to be hurting, and it's going to be catastrophic at $10,000 post-halvening.
Like, wouldn't the halvening, all things being equal, wouldn't you require the price to double after the halvening?
You generally do, assuming difficulty doesn't decrease, which we don't believe it will. You would effectively want your either price of power to half by 50% or the price to double to keep making the same amount of money, and that's where you're seeing using flare gas and the basically the we'll call it free power without actually being free. You just have to do stuff for it. But that's where you're going to find the miners move to, and they're already doing it. Like ERCOT with load response. Riot made more money in December and July than they did Bitcoin mining, when profitability was actually, looking bleak, right? So if they can keep running and losing money on Bitcoin mining for 3 weeks of the month, and that last week they make it all back in demand response, you'll see those miners continue there. But everyone is going to be a battle to generate the lowest cost power for themselves in the long run. I think in the next 4 years, you'll see the oil and gas industry really explode, and you'll see renewables like solar and wind augmentation. So having miners running when in 2 a.m. when the wind's blowing and the power can't go anywhere. That will be where the players are able to survive post halvening $10,000 in those situations. Anyone else will be forced to shut off, and you'll see the difficulty kind of augment that. And a lot of those people will be people in like Saskatchewan industrial rate plans that haven't figured it out by then. They'll shut down. That's just really the truth of it. And we've seen that last halvening. We've seen it the halvening before that. So
yeah, that's like the tricky equation of the Bitcoin mining kind of industry is the halving, and how it like the I guess the tech itself. When I say tech, I mean like the hardware. And its efficiency and ability to kind of, I guess, be valuable moving forward, and what the cost is of that, and how many of these, the manufacturing of new miners, how many are coming online to then help push the difficulty regardless of what and then that's a mix of the power price, the machines themselves, and how much the machines cost, and what kind of debt, like how people are running their mining business as well. Which it was, I think people were getting pretty close. Not everyone, but there's always, every time after the price comes back down, you have the squeeze of everything, kind of the lobbing off of the fat. But knowing that balance is extremely important, I think, in the mining business. I'm not an expert at it, that's for sure. It's something that it doesn't freak me out. I find it super fascinating and something that I really want to hone in better and learn. But those fluctuations as well between like the ebb and flow of the cycle of 4 years or whatever is dampening. Like you see it in my opinion, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, but the volatility of it is constantly kind of honing in, and the technology itself, the hardware itself is getting more and more efficient. But I think the players that are going to kind of thrive and survive during this ebb and flow, the push and pull of the service that they're offering, are the ones that are like not just pinned to are really good debt management, one thing, but not just pinned to the value creation of the Bitcoin, holding up the Bitcoin network, wherein you're taking that waste energy and you're adding it into other systems, so you become not just that one trick pony. But it's easy to get carried away when you see the moon shots, like the rockets everywhere, and I don't know if that really answers your question.
You're also seeing a lot of the smaller guys going into kind of buying houses like Luxor, right, and buying their hash rate ahead of time, which gives them a little more guaranteed. You know, it's not like winning the lottery if you mine a Bitcoin. Like, they're able to do it. They're going to buy it from them. They're going to get it. They're going to have kind of a more stable revenue, be able to run it more like a traditional business rather than kind of a hope and prayer type thing.
And that's coming more and more. Like, as people are learning, it's maturing. You have more different types of industries, whether it's like financials or whatever, now coming in and creating that stability to support everyone. And people are learning as time goes on as well about what works, what doesn't work. They see, you learn through failing, fail fast, fail quick, get it over with, and move on. It's
startup life.
Yeah, exactly.
Right, Kev?
Oh, it's so much fun.
I guess the best way I could answer that question too that you originally had was, if you're not comfortable with the financial projections over 36 months at the lowest profitability you've seen in the last 24 months, you probably shouldn't be doing it. And that's the best way to describe it. Don't look at those peaks, and that's with all these leveraged dudes, they got blown out of the water because of it. That's the best way we look at it. If you're not fine with 8 cents or 9 cents a terahash, or probably shouldn't be doing it.
And that creates opportunity as well, right, on the back end. Like, over this last bit, and maybe we're not over, everyone says different things, but that's when you see like the real folks or the real players that have been in it for a while, like just sitting back, just grabbing their miners, like everything's good, let's go, all right, getting their connections back up and running, and it's and that doing that also, like, where there's more knowledgeable players in the field that are like have the capital ready at certain times, that helps to dampen and create a more stable kind of industry across the board.
Any other questions?
Oh, Trower.
Yeah.
Okay. So this is a less technical question, but more of a bigger picture question. So in terms of like lawmaking and research interest from universities, say for example, Sustainable Development Goals, they're 17% by the United Nations and all that kind of stuff. There's a lot of hate for Bitcoin mining in the sense that it's, quote unquote, environmentally terrible or whatever. How are you going to like combat that narrative, and in a simple way that can kind of change people's minds, policymakers, lawmakers? What do you think can be done about that?
I would say you have a good question, probably an answer for that, but I think it's really education, proper education, educating the right people, I think, is really important, and that's really broad. So to take that another level, to say, to actually educate and go out and do maybe campaigns and trade shows where you're not trying to sell anything and you're just trying to educate these people and what it can do. Specifically what I'm looking at with the anaerobic digestion and things like that, which are really new technologies, not in terms of being available, but using it in Bitcoin mining. telling people how that works and how it can actually create real world change. And it's not about Bitcoin mining, it's about these other technologies, and Bitcoin mining just supplements it. People will start to, I think, understand it. It's really a big understanding gap, and that's my perspective. I think is there's just a lack of education. Anyone who's in this Bitcoin space, I think, thinks it's really obvious to everyone else. Where anyone who's not in the Bitcoin space, they just don't get it, and it's not because they're not smart. It's just there's really lack of education from A to Z.
Yeah, it's not obvious for a lot of people, right?
And we're doing these roundtables like this across Canada, right? Our next one is in Ontario, then we're going to be in Quebec, and then we're in the Maritimes. Then they're all talking about Bitcoin mining because that is a big, big problem, is the lack of education. And even to go further is one of the things that when we're sitting down with the ministers in Alberta, we're whatever you think about the oil sands, it's been branded the tar sands because they lost control of the narrative. So what we want to do is make sure that we're in control of the narrative with millions and millions of dollars of a PR campaign that's going to go ahead of these announcements to make sure that people understand this is what we're doing, this is how we're doing it, this is what we're doing to these abandoned wells. That when you look at what the Premier Smith just announced, saying we're giving $100 million to clean up these wells. Well, if we can give this to the miners and tax them and make money off it, and they have to decommission it, these are some of the things that we're going to have to educate people on, and that's going to have to come from a government level. Like, there's no like Bit Farms and Hut 8 and Hive, they're not going to be paying for this shit, right? It's going to be government that's going to have to be out there education, and it's going to cost a lot.
It's not a simple message.
No. Dale?
Yeah, so in terms of Sask Power, is it true that if you independently generate a significant amount of power, you have to sell it to Sask Power? Is that correct? Like, there was a solar thing a couple of years ago where Sask Power was subsidizing solar panels, and then they took that subsidy away, and then the solar panel industry really tanked because, if you have solar panels on your property powering your house, any excess power has to be sold back. So if I was a billionaire and I set up my own power generation on my property, do I have to sell it to Sask Power?
I can speak to just the general generation side. I'm not as in tune on what happened with the net metering solar stuff that Sask Power was doing, but the short of it is that Sask Power has a exclusive right to generate, to basically produce, to sell, to distribute electricity in the province of Saskatchewan, and anyone else has to get written consent and authorization from Sask Power to do that. Up until probably the last 3 to 5 years, you're 100% right. No one really, unless they were big plants or developers, weren't able just to set up a megawatt or 2 megawatt generator and just start using their own power. There was a threshold of basically having to use it yourself. A third party couldn't be involved in consuming it. You couldn't really generate power and provide it as part of a lease. It got into a really complicated gray area, and we've dabbled around all of those realms, but ultimately now they're starting to open up those applications. There is a power producer authorization form that you can apply for, and they get granted. They do get applied. We've went through it and filled it out. We just didn't formally apply for it yet because we weren't going to operate in Saskatchewan. But basically, the full disclosure was that we would have got approved, following all of their rules. So in the last 5 years, it's gone a lot better. But prior to that, it basically was tough luck.
Yeah, I'm not super familiar with Chad. You might have a better idea on this, but I know in Alberta, if you're producing power and you're not producing it for yourself, if you're producing it for someone else, you have your own contract. You actually are forced to connect to the grid to be a part of the open grid and the power pool itself. That might have been where the first part of your question was kind of coming from. In Saskatchewan, I know that, or my understanding is that Sask Power is shaking in their boots or just really concerned about the self-generation for the large load customers. These are like the potash type folks who are solution mining, using cogen units and creating their steam or whatever the heck it is, and so they create their own power, but also the extra byproducts that they need from the water itself. but also that those are their biggest customers that are coming offline and their biggest money makers. And if they're building infrastructure and transmission around to get to these facilities to provide them the power that they need, and then all of a sudden these transmission lines have 0 megawatts, zero load going through them, they need to pay for them somehow. But I don't know if Chad, you want to talk to that at all? You might.
So the Power Generation Act, which was a piece of legislation that was entered into force in the 1950s in Saskatchewan, and this is what Jeremy said, it's still in force here, and the language is very clear in that. I've had to interpret that to clients over the years, and it gives SaskPower, just as Jeremy said, the exclusive right to generate, distribute, and transmit power.
And sell. Sell is a big part of it, and sell.
That's sort of verbatim. And so that still exists. That piece of legislation hasn't changed since the 1950s. Different programs have been put in place, but if you get a legal opinion on it, it all goes back to the Power Corporation Act. That piece of legislation still sits there. So my advice to clients over the years has always been that any self-generation needs approval from SaskPower, and that can come through a program, that can come through something. For the bigger IPP projects, that's an exclusive franchise waiver. So you get this waiver of SaskPower's exclusive franchise right. That's the downside, but as Will said, things are certainly changing right now. The miners are really driving this push for self-generation. SaskPower seems to be accommodating that, and that's really where it starts, and this is where the benefits are going to accrue to Bitcoin miners. There has to be more of a push for that as well too, and it's great that we're having these discussions and these conversations around that.
No, that you brought up a very good point there, because we're actually not only seeing this on the mining side, we're seeing this on the exchange side. We're seeing this as, IROC was written for, now Tetra's coming in, and we had our first Coinbase was our first, IROC approved exchange in Canada here. So a lot of that stuff that's written is written a long time ago. And that's some of the things that we're looking at, is trying to be there to rewrite some of this and make sure that we're not rewriting it just by saying because we should, by having the Oslers and the Deloittes and these people at the table that the governments respect, and as they should. They're very reputable organizations, and the miners are working with these companies to make sure that they are compatible. So regulation is going to be such a big part of everything moving forward in the entire digital assets industry.
And I think there's lots of opportunities for Bitcoin miners to partner with the potash miners. The potash miners here in Saskatchewan carry a disproportionate amount of influence. Maybe not disproportionate depending on your perspective, but they carry a lot of influence with SaskPower, and that's really where a lot of the challenge still sits right now. But if I could just ask a question, just kind of a follow-up question around that too, it's to Jeremy. Well, first of all, thanks for being here. It's awesome that you guys are here. You have just a wealth of knowledge around power generation and project development. But just a question about maybe to share your thoughts around the role of Indigenous groups here in Saskatchewan. I've seen Indigenous groups come to the forefront of and pushing to the forefront to own power generation assets and starting to assert authority to do that. And if you look at how SaskPower has reacted to that, it's been really interesting, because they've been accommodating that. So right now, if you're an independent power producer, an IPP, you want to generate your own power, you pretty much need an Indigenous partner here in Saskatchewan. Don't even really bother showing up if you don't have an Indigenous partner that's going to own equity in that power generation project. And so we've seen this evolve over the past 15 years, but especially the last 5 years. But the question I think mostly to Jeremy and Will, both of you, is how do you see a role, or do you see a role for Indigenous groups in the mining space, specifically on the power generation, but maybe beyond that, maybe owning different parts of the whole process? Do you see a role there, or?
100%, because as we start to take off the land more and more through oil and gas, through just the impact that we're having on the land, we want to talk to those stakeholders and those people that have, that should be making those decisions. So I tremendously see in Saskatchewan for sure, in other provinces. I think, like you said, we're very, it's new, and it's something that's growing. And I think for sure, education again comes back to it, educating the Indigenous stakeholders and educating people from the mining side, how that all works and how those relationships can be formed. Again, comes back to education, but 100% the mining industry and the actual operations, I think, complement it amazingly.
Yeah, I echo that as well. I think it's great that there's opportunity across the board. I'm involved in the 100 megawatt RFP right now, put together a special purpose entity, still working through that, but it's we brought multiple players to the table for this one project, and I'm not sure how I see it on the mining side. I see it being similar per se, but it's just in general, mining in Saskatchewan is such an early stage, and almost like maybe I don't want to say a pipe dream, but it's like something that we're talking about it now and all excited about it, and this is kind of the focus of this chat. But I don't know if it's been fully understood. It's still like it's not there yet, and it's and partnering with these types of the Indigenous folk that are interested in participating is a huge opportunity that can provide some of that leverage early on to break open these new barriers and get to the table that maybe some of the renewable space has maybe led the charge of being able to start to develop in the region itself, wherein it maybe wasn't as welcomed, I think.
I know as a CBC side of things, Kalea, our executive director, and my partner there, she's Indigenous, she's African American or Canadian. So it's not something that we figured out yet, but it's something we're talking about. And it might not be so much on the Bitcoin mining side of it, or what could be some of the products that we can produce. But maybe it's vertical, maybe it's fresh vegetables, maybe not the deep root stuff that that vertical farming can do just yet. But it could be something along those lines. So I mean, it's a really, really early stage talks about where we want to go with that and how we're going to go with that, because we don't want it to be fluff. We just don't want to say we're going to get them all, get involved, get this band and that, and go from there. It's just we want it to be a meaningful conversation when we have it. So it's not something that we've really put into our 41 page, because again, we want it to matter, right? It means something to us, and we just don't want to say something we're not going to stand behind.
One thing too, there's a lot more volatility, just to add, in the mining industry versus power generation, like solar array or solar facility or wind facility. The margins are tight. These are projects built for long, amortized over long periods of time. Their O&M, their fuel costs are like very minimal. So the risk is much lower in these projects. So to kind of bridge and not that they're that much similar, they're not the same. And it's one of those things that I think it'll be interesting to see what those opportunities are moving forward, because I think they're there, but it will be different than the wind or solar opportunities, which are much more risk removed and guaranteed returns over longer periods of time. The person or the capital, the cash flows coming in or the revenue streams are coming in from the SaskPower, government-backed entity that's paying for the power purchase agreement, versus with zero fuel costs, versus your hoping to mine Bitcoin with this equipment that will be obsolete maybe in a few years' time. So there's a lot more moving parts, and you need to be, I think, in the mining industry, a lot more agile. I'm sure you're working on things 6 months ago or a year ago, or you wouldn't have expected that your focus is on, and not to say that there isn't a ton of opportunity there, but you have to be quite agile. And I think in doing so, your revenue streams are a lot less, a lot more volatile, and a lot more risk, inherent risk built into it.
All right, crystal ball time. There we go. Future of Saskatchewan mining. So if you best case scenario, or what do you see of the future of Bitcoin mining in Saskatchewan? Will, you can go first.
Oh, miners everywhere at every substation throughout the province, being distributed as the load comes. I think it's one of the best opportunities that Saskatchewan has, we complain it's a monopoly, we complain about that it's the staunchy old kind of infrastructure, or not infrastructure, but framework that everything's operating in, but that also has a huge opportunity or value add to it, potentially too, wherein these organizations aren't that big. Wherein if it might be easier to communicate what the value is and then have the right few individuals with moxie be able to quantify that and then impose it and put it into practice, rather than maybe another jurisdiction that is much more slower moving, debated, all these things are kind of bouncing back and forth. It almost sounds like, I hate to say this, but like operating like a China versus like another jurisdiction, where all of a sudden you want something to happen, you just sweep a hand, and it just like is now this new way of working. Maybe that was not the right way to put it, but there is opportunity in that. For every like yin, there is a yang. And crystal ball, yeah, integrating. I can't imagine when these utilities are putting moratoriums out there, whether it's Manitoba or whoever. I would, if I was someone, an exec at MBA, Manitoba Hydro, I would be like, I want Manitoba Hydro to own these miners. I want, or maybe be like, not necessarily own them, but own the facilities that give the opportunity to the industry to participate in them. And for them not to do that is like, I feel like they're missing the freaking boat. Like, they have a huge opportunity there to open up a huge part of their business that they haven't even been a part of. They are the power entity. SAS Power is the power entity, and if they can get on board with this and participate, like crystal ball, like best case scenario, yeah, that's they become it. They're a part of it.
They're already orange, so that works. My crystal ball, whether or not it happens or not, is that there's zero methane emissions from the upstream oil and gas industry, and then that's a pipe dream for sure, because I know some of the processes that occur, it's impossible to capture it all. But there's no reason that there should be a candlestick flare running anywhere in the world. It's just not. It's a 100-year-old problem, and Bitcoin solves it.
I guess to kind of finish the last comment here is, I guess our crystal ball is what you see in Canada, is whether it's usually the OSC or the ASC, Ontario or Alberta Securities Exchanges, that every other province adopts. Like, so as soon as it's like monkey see, monkey do. So if we can get, if the, Alberta's right now, gung ho, and we get through this election, and if the right government wins that wants to, move it forward, regulation will probably happen and come. And then I think that you'll just see people like, oh my God, Alberta did it. Oh, Saskatchewan will be, oh, Manitoba. And then we hope it will fall into place, because we've seen that happen in so many other industries when one of the big provinces do that. So we're hoping that we can really get somebody on board to work with us, to understand it, and then we'll be able to educate other provinces by saying, hey, this is what Alberta's doing, this is what Manitoba's doing, this is what Saskatchewan's doing, and really, move that ball forward really, really quickly after that happens. So again, I'd like to thank Gerame and Will for coming out and sharing their knowledge with us. Obviously, Levander and Dale for hosting this and being awesome Saskatchewan ambassadors for us. And we appreciate everybody here coming out and minus 29 and hanging out, and just for your gratitude, that last round was on me, because you had to sit here in the, we got to stay warm when we go outside here to wherever we're going to go next. But again, thank you so much. If you want to join the CBC, take a thing, sign it. This is going to be posted up on YouTube. If you want to share it with your friends, share it with people that are interested in it, so we can, again, the more education we get out there, the grassroots, we want to move this forward. So thank you, everybody.
And thank you, Jade.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yeah, lots of food.
That's just brought up some warm stuff.
License plates. Yeah, you came all the way from Calgary for this.
5 a.m. this morning.
Wow.
Roads were good.
They were really good.
Yeah.
We were worried that Regina Saskatchewan did bad, but it was like.
It was actually the north-south highways. Like when I left
Yeah.
Calgary, Calgary Crossfield always sucks.
Yeah.
Right, and then when I'm driving down Bicycle, and then you get the north, boom, it was clear.
Yeah,
and I got to the kind of highway there.
We're not chasing anybody away.
Yeah.
What do you winning? It's good. Lots of cars. It's a semi-sound. We had this way, it's like bullshit. It took probably about, I don't know, 4 seconds from that white wall to go, and then you're on.
Oh, yeah.
I can't see it.
Sketchy.
Okay. It makes sense. I was trying to pass the semi right now.
Yeah.
He's on her. Yeah. We're glad you're here. Thanks for coming. Oh, no, we're excited.
I told you all to talk about softball questions.
Yeah, no,
Think of the
it's a
hardest
good
question I
question.
could.
It's a good,
That's a good question.
it's a good question.